Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are live, and today you can see what we're talking about. But first off, this is your first time here. We are a show that just loves to talk about news from that Christian standpoint, whether it's things in the outside world or things within the church, like we're talking about today. This is not your first time here. Highly encourage you to like, share, and subscribe, as it really does help out in pushing this message. So today, if you couldn't tell by the thumbnail, we're going to talk about some comments made by two prominent pastors, one that is very new and one that's a little bit old. And as you can see here from the headline that we are talking about, Pastor Ed Young, Ed Young Jr., just to let you know, uh, and sorry about that if you can hear any of that, but it calls people who say megachurches are too big hypocrites. And we're going to go ahead and play that audio for you. So that way we can go ahead and kind of get this into a little bit more of a context. It's a very short video, so there's not much to take out of context, I guess you can say. So I hope y'all are having a wonderful one out there, and let's go ahead and jump into this, because ultimately what I want people to see out of this is honestly what I think is the reason why he's making these comments, and also make the case that, and I'm just going to be straight up forward with you. I'm always going to be an advocate for the small church, the local church that is doing the Lord's work, small congregations that can individually focus on people, discipleship. Honestly, what I think is a biblical model for church. Now, with all that being said, I'm not a megachurch hater. I don't think all megachurches are bad. I just personally believe that you see more growth in people in a smaller church where the word of God is being preached faithfully. Once again, that's my opinion, and I am always subject to being wrong. Let's go ahead and jump into this article and watch this clip. So, Ed Young, the founding pastor and senior pastor of the Multi Site Fellowship Church in Grapevine, Texas, recently suggested that people who complain about megachurches are too big are hypocrites. In a megachurch, and here we're going to get a definition of it is, by the way, this article does come from the Christian Post, and it's written by Leonardo Blair. Link is in the description. He goes on to say a megachurch, according to the Heart-Fed Institute research, religion research, is a church that has a consistently average weekly attendance of 2,000 or more worshipers. There were about 1,170 such churches in the United States back in 2023, which a report by Worship Leader shows, which is fewer than 580 or fewer, roughly 1750 megachurches. A lot of numbers right here, number crunching, which was also reported by the Hartford Institute for Religious Research in 2020. So a little bit of a drop. So let's go ahead and look at these comments that he had to say, and let's listen to it first before we go ahead and talk about it. So here it is. Let's make sure our audio is on, because it's on Facebook. It was shared by a Facebook reel. Let me know if there are any issues with the audio or anything like that. Let's go ahead.
Church is just too big. I've heard people tell me that a lot. It's too big. It's a mega church. Well, that's got to be one of the most hypocritical statements someone can make, because the person making the statement goes to massive concerts. They would go to a game, a football game. They would go to a massive mall, and they never really say that about those entities, but they always say the church is too big. Hey, if you think the church is too big, then you're not going to like heaven, because heaven is going to be a big place. If a church is around a lot of people, it should be big in the context of being big. Your church is just...
Okay, so as you can see there, honestly, you could take takes a very condescending point of view when he's writing this. You could see it in his facial expressions. Not much concern of actually wanting to reach an understanding with people. Really just wants to make a statement and talk about what he wants to talk about in there, which I think automatically turns people off that are anti-megachurch. So if his goal was to reach people, saying, hey, megachurches are a good thing, and he should have gone about it a much different way. So I think he's preaching to his own audience there, instead of actually trying to change the minds of people who are anti-megachurch. And honestly, the justification that he gave, I think is garbage. It's straight up garbage. And you guys can let me know what you think about it in the comments, for using those in the live chat. And for those watching in the future, please still drop those comments in there. let this conversation keep going. But first off, he says if you don't like megachurches, then you're a hypocrite. He doesn't really leave that open ended. He makes a statement saying that you are a hypocrite. And then he cites the fact that you go to concerts, even though he doesn't know if you go to big giant concerts, that you go to football games. He doesn't know if you go to football games. I mean, I can tell you what, Ed Young, I have not gone to a big giant concert ever since I became a Christian. I have not gone to a big giant football game ever since I became a Christian. And even if I have, I don't understand your reasoning of why someone who is anti megachurch and how that correlates within itself. So wrong on multiple levels, and then makes the statement that if you don't like mega churches, if you don't like big churches, then you're not going to like heaven because heaven is big. If you are comparing your church building and your assembly to heaven, I think there's a lot of things wrong with that because churches are full of imperfect people who are trying to worship God. Heaven is going to be full of perfect people made perfect by Jesus Christ who are offering worship to God. Not a correlation there whatsoever. He's really reaching it. It's honestly sad. And where this goes back to why I believe Ed Young is making this statement, it all goes back to money. It all goes back to money. And you can pull up some news articles where it looked like some local news organizations from some years ago did some investigating on him and saw just how much of a honestly what I would like to say is probably a hypocrite of him, of how he has a very rich lifestyle and things of that nature. And we can just go to a couple different articles here, right here. Pastor Ed Young, Fellowship Church, Grapevine, is a very public persona, but News 8 learned some things about his private life that may not fly with some of his congregation, including his corporate jet. And it talks about how they're at one point was one of the fastest growing churches. It lost a little bit of people. And then it goes into basically just his lavish lifestyle, his private jet, his multi-million-dollar home. Uh, it's honestly just kind of sad. And you can read this article for yourself. I did not link this in the description, but I'll link it in after this live is over. But it's talking about how he has a 10,000 square foot, $1.5 million estate. Not only that, if you go to this second article, it talks about his private jet that flies around back and forth to Miami and other various locations. Miami, by the way, he owns a condo there as well that's valued over $1 million. At least it was back in 2010, I believe, when this article was first written. And it just points to obviously Ed Young loves his lavish lifestyle. So, of course, he wants megachurches to be popular because that's going to feed into his paycheck. If you didn't know, a normal pastor of a normal size, I'll go ahead and say a normal attending congregation of about 200 is probably not making that much money. They're probably making enough money to put a roof over their head, feed their family, and live what I would like to say is, a somewhat comfortable life. By no means a lavish lifestyle, just comparing to pastors that I have known in congregations about that size. Now, obviously, Ed Young, who is not financially transparent, and you can once again read through these articles after I link them, he is not financially transparent at all when it comes to his lifestyle, at least when this article was written in 2010. And I've tried to look up some recent stuff on him to see if there was anything else. I didn't see anything. It just seems like, honestly, the guy's making a lot of money off of his church. He's also known for being very loud and outlandish. Like he had a where he put like a bed or something like that on the roof of his church, and it was like the sex challenge or something dumb like that. It's honestly really sad when you get into it. And I'm gonna go ahead and get to comments as we get closer to the end here, by the way. So we'll jump into those if for those who are commenting on the live stream, because I do want to listen to what y'all have to say about this and get your opinion on this. Because once again, I'm a fallible person. I could always be wrong about things. Let's go ahead and head back into this article because maybe you're wondering why Andy Stanley was on here. Well, you're going to find out here soon if you don't remember from the past. So it goes through the statement. Ed Young, who has a weekly attendance of more than 24,000 in 2020, noted the people have frequently told him his church is just too big. And he goes on to make that statement that we just listened to. It honestly, just bad reasoning, bad statements. There was nothing biblical that he brought up whatsoever. It was once again just opinion pointing and all this kind of stuff. Because if you go to the Bible and you look at the biblical model for a church, it looks like most churches probably took place in somebody's house. And most of the richer homes, because some people, we do see biblical evidence for maybe some people who had church in their house. Maybe some of them were a little bit more well off financially. And in that, they can fit, I believe, like when they dug up Ephesus, it seemed like one of the bigger homes can fit maybe 100 people in it, if you're really stuffing them in there. But nevertheless, smaller church model is what you see of a local assembly. Let's dig into this article a little bit because it brings up some facts. It says the average church in the US seats approximately 200 people, but the median weekly attendance is 65. This means that half of all churches in the US have fewer than 65 people in attendance each week. Data cited by worship leaders shows that megachurches make up only 0.5% of churches nationwide, serving some 4 million attendees weekly. As Americans continue to undergo a cultural shift away from organized religion, the phenomenon of the megachurch and the long history of Protestantism is also taking a hit with growing competition from traditional churchgoers. And it kind of goes into this spiel here talking about this and how some people are seeing the hypocrisy that comes along with megachurches. And obviously, all you got to do is look at all the scandals that are popping up in megachurch after megachurch after megachurch to realize that they're running more like a business than they would a church. Now, don't get me wrong, smaller churches have their fair share of issues and scandals and things like that. It just flies under the radar because they're not as well known. But at the same time, you have so much more accountability inside of a smaller church, especially if you are elder led. By the way, I went to the website, which we will examine for Ed Young's church. No mention of elders there whatsoever. So it looks like he's kind of running the show all by himself. Because when you go to their leadership tab, all it has is a picture of him and his wife. And yes, sadly, he considers his wife to also be a pastor. Once again, not biblical. 1 Timothy chapter 2 makes that abundantly clear. But no sign of elders. I don't see any sign of deacons if they do have them. So Ed Young's probably running around as that megachurch's senior pastor with every bit of control and the fattest paycheck of them all. It goes on to those stats and talks about the various things with small churches. And then it gets into what Andy Stanley said back in 2016. 2016, Pastor Andy Stanley, the senior leader of North Point Community Church in Georgia, one of the largest churches in the U.S., had to apologize on social media for suggesting that some people who attend small churches are, quote, so stinking selfish. I tried to pull up that clip, but that clip has been deleted from their media. So unless it's floating around somewhere else, but that's what he says, according to the quote, they are so stinking selfish. And we'll actually go ahead and pull up the tweet here if I can find it. We'll get to it here in a little bit. It's somewhere on Twitter where basically he had to once again apologize for making that statement. And he did come out and apologize, to his credit, for making that statement. It never should have been made in the first place. But honestly, he was probably speaking from what he really believes. And then once he got the backlash, he went ahead and recanted his statement. Does he actually still feel that way? I have no idea. And did he only say sorry because of the backlash, or did he truly feel that? Once again, I have no idea. Nevertheless, the words were said. If you go to a small church and you don't like large churches, then you are, quote, so stinking selfish. Anley contended in a sermon that large churches were better for a child's Christian development than smaller churches. I don't understand how, but he says this is one reason why we build big churches. People say, why do you have to make them so big? Let me tell you why, Stanley said. He said, we want churches to be large enough so there are enough middle schoolers and high schoolers that we don't have one youth group with middle school and high schoolers together. That's your reasoning? That's really your reasoning? When we want there to be so many adults that there will be so many middle school and high school kids that we can have two separate environments. Here's the other thing, and some of you may disagree with me on this. This is not a issue that, sorry, let me go ahead and pause the ad running here. This may not be this isn't anything in the Bible. So, but honestly, we don't see a biblical model for children's church, for youth church, things of that nature, where you split your teenagers off from the parents on a Sunday sermon. I've always been of the mind that when church was going on back in the old days, their kids were probably sitting right there with them. We don't know. We don't have any evidence to say that, but it makes sense because what are you going to do? Just leave them at home? No, you're going to bring them with you. Why can't your teenager or your child or your elementary schooler or even, as long as they're not, I can understand if they're, kind of unruly and screaming all throughout the church service. But why can't they sit there and learn with you while you are at church? And that way, like my father, I would go to little children's Sunday school in the beginning, but then I would sit in church service with my mom, with my dad, and they would basically discuss with me what we talked about in that message and have a good family conversation about it. But if Andy Stanley's so worried about youth groups and that's his justification for why a church needs to be large, I think that's a garbage justification. Says Stanley criticized some adults who prefer to go to a congregation that only has a couple hundred members as, quote, selfish. When I hear adults say, well, I don't like a big church, I like about 200, I want it 200. I like about 200. I want to be able to know everybody. I say, you are so stinking selfish. You care nothing about the next generation. All you care about is you and your 5 friends. You don't care about your kids, anybody else's kids. That's a pretty bold statement to make. That is a very bold statement to make and a very incorrect one. And he was right for once again later going on X and apologizing for that. And actually, there's the link for it. So we'll go ahead and bring it up once again. He made this back in 2016. The negative reaction to the clip from last weekend's message is entirely justified. Heck, I was even offended by what I said. I apologize. Now, is he apologizing because of calling people selfish, or is he apologizing because he repented of his horrible, horrible belief that small churches are wrong and only big churches are right? Who knows? I don't know. I mean, I could tell you somebody who has gone to when I was in my 20s, and this is just once again, little side note here. So, in when I was a superficial Christian, when I was not a real Christian, I thought I was, I definitely was not. My lifestyle definitely did not reflect that. Same thing for my wife. We were attending a very giant megachurch in the Tacoma, Washington area. And we were going to that church Saturday night. We would drink it up. We would live like the world. And Sunday morning, we would go to church and check the block and feel perfectly great about ourselves because that megachurch pastor never really talked about sin, never really tried to convict us, just wanted a warm and welcoming environment where people could come and pay their tithes. Well, fast forward some years later, my wife and I started going to a biblical church and we were convicted on our sin. And we actually started turning to the Bible more and actually reading our Bible more. And honestly, it wasn't definitely because of the small church, but I think that small church environment, having somebody that we were accountable to, we couldn't just sneak in and sneak out unnoticed and not say hello to anybody. People were there to hold us accountable because we knew them, because it was such a small church. And ever since then, my wife and I decided, hey, we are going to continue going to smaller churches, on usually about 200 or less than what we did. Heck, our previous church in Louisiana, I think only had about 20 people in it. But man, I tell you what, those people love God and worship him. And yes, they still give to missions. They still give in support. So don't think just because you're in a small church that they don't support missions and things like that. I do believe churches should be supporting missions, by the way. So a 2020 fact cited by Lifeway Research shows that data cited by worship leaders shows that megachurches make up, we already kind of went over that. Apologize for that. Um, but going back to Andy Stanley's comments, Stanley later expressed once again the remorse that he had, and that was the end of the article. Now, let's go ahead and jump over to some comments that y'all have in here because y'all have been flying through it, and I want to make sure that I reach out to these comments because y'all bring up some really, really good points, which is why I love doing this live. Stephanie Collins writes that that's bigger than the town that I grew up in, talking about the size of Ed Young's megachurch. Absolutely. I could say the same thing. Um, she also puts, who is this joker? Corporal worship and fellowship with believers, games, rock concert, malls. It's all the same. And I'm there for you. I agree with you. Continuing on, apologize for the pauses and just going through these comments. A lot of y'all are talking to each other, which is outstanding. I love this. Stephanie also writes, who is he pastoring? I wonder who he'd say he pastors on a regular basis. And exactly, that's the other thing. A great point to bring up. These megachurch pastors, I had a very close friend that was attending a megachurch, probably about 2,000 people in size. They were having some marriage issues. They wanted to go to the pastor for some counseling. It took weeks upon weeks to get on that pastor's calendar. They had to go through multiple different gateways. And when they finally got to meet with the pastor, you know what that pastor told them? And this is just a bad reflection or a reflection of the church's bad theology. That pastor told them, yeah, it definitely seems like you got some differences. Maybe a divorce is going to be a good thing for y'all. That's what he told them. This was a church over in Lufkin, Texas. Horrible, 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 horrible. But that's what you get when these churches, who these pastors really aren't pastoring anybody. They're paid public speakers who get up and they talk, and then they don't do any work behind the scenes. Now, I don't know what Ed Young does at his church behind the scenes. I'm only generalizing from what I've seen in a lot of mega churches previously. I haven't done the research into it to accuse him of that or anybody else that I've talked about in this article. But that's the general thing that I see in a lot of mega churches. The pastor doesn't do any pastoring, they just do a lot of talking. Continuing on with the comments, Elaine writes, why would that make them selfish? Returning back to the comments that was made on Andy Stanley. I have no idea. I have no idea why that would make you selfish, because you want to be in a small local body where you know everybody and you're held accountable by them, and you want your kids to grow with you in grace and knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. I mean, to me, it just sounds like Andy Stanley wants to control the next generation, not grow the next generation with that. Once again, he did repent from that statement, but did he repent from the context, or did he just repent from his words of saying people are selfish? Angie writes, kids sit with them. I'm a supporter of that too. Once again, I'm not saying that this way is the absolute right way. I understand. I just have the belief that I do think your kids should be sitting right next to you in church, learning alongside you, so you can discuss this in a family conversation. Stephanie writes, my Southern Baptist church was a typical old SBC. My parents were on 3 to 4 different committees. And you give it, and you're preaching to the choir, because this is kind of how I kind of grew up. Except we weren't SBC. We were actually more of like an independent fundamental Baptist, which I'm glad we left. But the woman cleaned the church ourselves. The men did the repairs. And yeah, that reminds me a lot of my church when I was in Louisiana. You know, that's 20 people. We had a hurricane blow through that church. Tree fell on our main sanctuary. The people gathered together inside that church to repair that church. They could have just closed up shop, said, we only have 20 people. Let's go ahead and stop doing this. No, they didn't do that. We fixed the church up because we cared. Shelley says exactly what I was talking about. It's so much easier to indoctrinate the kids when the parents aren't present. And exactly. I see. I nothing else to really add to that. Stephanie writes, I can go on and on, but we were selfish. Oh, that makes me hot. Exactly. Shelly writes, my ARC church. Shelly comments on here a lot. She used to be an ARC church member, Association of Related Churches, which she educated me on, and I appreciate that. Says, church intentionally targeted families through youth programs. Get the kids, you've got the parents. And you're 100% right. When Rick Warren first started Saddleback Church, after he graduated seminary in the 1970s, you can basically say him and Bill Hybels are responsible for the seeker-sensitive model that we see today in so many megachurches. But what Rick Warren did was he went door to door around that Saddleback Valley, or maybe he was in the Southern California area. I can't remember exactly where, but he went door to door asking people, hey, why don't you go to church? And what would make you want to go to church? The answers he received were things such as, the number one thing that most people were listing off was youth groups, children's activities, children programs, places I can basically dump my kids off to. So what did he do? He also got a whole bunch of other stuff, like such as sermons are too long. We don't want to feel convicted on sin. We want to have contemporary music, things of that nature. But what did Rick Warren do? He set up Saddleback Church on that model based off those comments that people made which is why that church probably got very, very popular very, very fast, because you're feeding worldly things to worldly people. It was a church for the unchurched, or like I say, the church for the unsaved, which ultimately is an unbiblical process. Romans chapter 8, verse 8, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You're ultimately creating an environment for people who cannot offer worship to God when you create a church for the unsaved. Angie writes, I agree. I belong to one that does not have more than 400. Wow, I guess we are selfish. And then y'all are going crazy in the comments here. So I really do appreciate it. Um, Dylan writes, when does a church become a megachurch? The numbers, how do they do service? So, citing here, I don't think there is a standard definition, but going back to this article, uh, it says here that it was anybody over, I believe they said it was 2,000, according to the Hartford Institute for Religion Research. Anybody that has a weekly attendance of 2,000 or more worshipers is what they consider a megachurch. It's a subjective opinion, a subjective definition. So it's really whatever you think it is. I always go back to this advice that my dad told me when I told him that I want to be a pastor after I get out of the military. He said, Tim, if you ever do and you are a part of a church, if you get to the point where you do not know the names of your regular attendees, that church is too big. That church needs to split up. And I really like that model of splitting up. When I say split up, not a bad split up, I'm talking about doing either a church plan or a church revitalization. What that is basically is revitalize. I think a lot of people know what a church plan is, but a revitalization is basically you look at another church in your area that is maybe lacking, and what you do as a church that is growing and getting too big is you can put some of your budget into that dying church. You can put a elder who is ready to be a pastor in as the senior pastor as that church, and you're not, some incorporated mega church with multi-satellite campuses. No, you're helping another church grow and making sure that they are resting on sound biblical doctrine. And then you ask some of your congregation, hey, who would be willing to go over here? And you split off some of the congregation into that church. That's a church revitalization. I believe Nine Marks Ministries has a lot on that, but you can go about it a few different ways. But that's one way that I would personally do it if I was ever a pastor and my church was getting to that point where I couldn't name you who the members are of that church when I look at them. That's once again just me and what I my personal opinion in that. Annette writes, I agree. I'm not for mega churches. People usually get lost in the shuffle. And you're so true, because I remember a friend telling me, and I was witnessing to him. He told me he was already a Christian. I asked him what church he goes to. He said the church, which was a local mega church. And I asked him why he liked that church. He said, because I can slip in and slip out without anybody talking to me. We had to go into a much larger conversation after that, but you can see the mentality of people who go to mega churches. That's not everybody who goes to a mega church, but that is a lot of people who go to a mega church. They want to slip in, slip out, not be held accountable, not feel convicted about things. And ultimately, like I said, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You're not going to be offering worship to God that way. Angie writes, "Whoa, 2,000 is too many." Um, Dylan the Dingo writes, "Why wouldn't that make MacArthur's church a megachurch? Pretty church holds around 8,000 members in '08. LOL." And absolutely, John MacArthur is a mega church pastor. I'm not sure about the numbers. I think one time when I read, he seats about like 3,000 a service, and I think he holds 2 or 3 services. I don't know what he does in his age now, because I know his stamina is not what it used to be. I think he's actually hasn't been preaching lately just because of health related issues. But MacArthur's, he's one of those outliers. I personally don't agree with John MacArthur's, the size of John MacArthur's church. That's my personal opinion. Once again, he's an outlier in the fact that I do believe MacArthur, especially in his younger years, preached a very solid message and a solid gospel. Some of you may disagree with me on that. I know he's a controversial pastor. That's once again my opinion. But I do believe his church is just too large. I think it would be better to split that church up and plant some pastors that are solid around the areas. So that way, you can spend more time pastoring the people inside that church. Once again, my opinion. Lane put, I agree it can be more subjective in definition when it comes to the definition of a mega church. Shelley writes seeker sensitive equals mega church, and you're not too far off over there with that statement, Shelley. Um, E writes, I agree with small churches. Your dad was right, but I believe the main issue going on are those churches are their pastors, as we've been witnessing, and their theology. Yeah, exactly. And you could just go through the different shows that we've done over the past 6 months on this channel talking about that and seeing all these headlines that are coming out from megachurch pastors that have fallen away. Once again, things like this happen in small churches as well. You just don't hear about it a lot because of, they're not huge, but you see, and this is once again my personal view that I've had from 20 years of being in the military, having to move every 3 years of my life and looking at church after church after church, trying to find a solid church to go to. The smaller churches typically will have less scandals simply because there is more accountability there. Elaine writes, they don't even know who their flock is, and that's really, one of the key points. Angie writes, I want to know who that is across the room. And yeah, I agree with you. I love the fact that if I don't show up to church for maybe 2 weeks, like in the job that I'm getting ready to leave out, I would have to go away for 2, 3 weeks and travel, across the world. And in that, I would have people reach out to me and be like, "Hey, brother, just checking in on you, is making sure everything's okay. We're taking care of Giselle for you, things of that nature." My wife, and it. I love that. In a mega church, are you gonna get that? Maybe if you're really, really active and a part of a small group, but in a smaller church, you're definitely gonna get that because people actually care for you, I feel like. Anyways, all right, so I think we said all that we really need to say for now on this, and I Angie, you hit the mark. Yes, they're checking up on you, and once again, I can't tell you how much I love the current church I'm at. I'm so sad that we are moving in a few weeks because I love this church so much, and I'm so sad that we're leaving there. But God, in God's will, things don't happen without God having a say in it. So obviously, He wants us to go ahead and move over to that Oklahoma area, which is where we are going. Um, but yeah, anyways, I'm going to talk about that in a later episode because we are going to be taking a short little break as I am moving for a week or two. But don't worry, I got some videos that I have pre-recorded that I'm going to go ahead and put out, a little bit more of a documentary style videos. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to have that uploading and scheduled to release on days that I will not have internet access to do this. But anyways, all right, with all that being said, I love y'all and I will talk to y'all later on the next one. Stay biblical and keep the conversation going. I really do appreciate all you on here, and I will talk to you later. See you on the next one.